Cherry can be a difficult wood to finish. It has a very strong sapwood, which is white in color. So very similar to walnut, that's brown and then has this white in color. So the other thing about cherry that's tricky is that tree to tree or board to board, you can have a variation in the reddish pigmentation or coloration of the cherry itself. Some just is really light colored. I mean, look at this board right here. This is actually cherry, and my trough is cherry. And I mean, this is almost 30 years old. So, but when I first finished this, it was super dark. It was a very dark version of cherry, almost dark, brownish red. It just had that coloration in it. Now you can see this cherry. This is cherry unfinished. This is a much milder, lighter color. Now over time, cherry does darken. It does get a really beautiful patina, and it deepens in color with age. So my best advice is if you're doing a tabletop, that's the hardest time that you want to match boards up. If you're doing a tabletop, make, if at all possible, the entire top out of the same board or out of consecutive boards or boards from the same tree. Now that's not always possible. So, especially if you're making a large dining table. So there's some little tricks and tips to get things a little more harmonious. I'm not going to talk about gluing up a top. I do have another video on that if you want to look at that. There's some strategies to gluing it up. But I want to talk about dealing with the coloration and some of the issues of the tricky color that cherry can give you. Now, I have this top right here, and what I've got on the back is a bit of sapwood. Now, you can use the sapwood to enhance and make, a bright streak. This is obviously the bottom. That would be a terrible glue up because you've got an obvious straight line, and that's the seam. If you were going to showcase the sap, you would do it in such a way that you brought the board around and you would have like a mirror image or so of the sap here. So you'd have almost like this painted stripe that was purposeful and did not intentionally show the seam like that. So this is going to be the underside of this top that I glued up. But this side was made entirely of the same board. So you have a beautiful kind of coloration match all the way across. So I know that as time goes on and as this oxidizes and it deepens in color, it will stay pretty much the same. But you can't always know that. If you glue up from different trees, you could get a darker board right next to another, thinking you had the same initially. Usually it'll show up darker when you first finish it, but it gets more accentuated over time. So here's a little trick. You can wash the entire board with a dye stain, or you could put a glazing stain on. Now, I am not a big fan of glazing stains. Sorry, not glazing stain, a gel stain. All right? Let me just show you what a gel stain can do for you. All right? Gel stains are like these thick-bodied stains that have a really heavy pigment in them, and typically you don't have to stir them much, but this one's been sitting on the shelf so long I hardly use it. I haven't had it that long, but what happens is with a gel stain, the color does not absorb into the wood very deeply. It kind of lays on top. So what happens is you're putting like almost like a lens of color over the entire top, and it's in the form of pigments. So it's a very fine ground, like colored soil, earth, whatever. So this one is, this is my brown mahogany. anyhow, I just want to show you a little bit here. Now, gel stains will solve your problem and will make your top look more harmonious. You're making it more opaque. Let's just do a little on this board and see how much it hides that line there. Or, you know, this is not really the best test, but you're going to see, I should say, this has been just, this is not well sanded. This went through the drum sander, I think at 120, so it's probably going to show that stuff. But look at, it's getting caught in that as well. But I'm putting this gel stain on, and yeah, it's working, but it's also killing a lot of the depth. Now, it's not quite fair. If I had sanded it finer, it wouldn't be holding on quite as much, but it still lays on top of the surface. You're not getting the like a penetration, like a soaking in and absorption that with this stain. So it's almost halfway to paint. All right, so let's try to wipe some of that off. You can see that, right? Yeah. All right, so see, we can see the grain again. And what it does is it really evens out the color. This striped area is still showing, but it's not quite as in your face. So what I usually do if I have to show sapwood is use a dye stain or something and just dye that a little more aggressively. Now let me show it another way. So that's gel stains. I don't like them that much because they look too manufactured. So a lot of the finishes you get from production, if you go to like a discount furniture store, you're going to get basically nearly painted on finishes. You know, everything looks so uniform. So we're not going for that when we make our own furniture at home, or we want to give something as a gift. I'm trying to enhance the natural beauty of a beautiful piece of wood. And so a lot of the quality of the outcome is based on how well I select the materials. So I may have said this before, but in all the years of doing custom furniture work, it usually came out that when I calculated how much labor I had in it, that the materials were 10% of the cost of the project. 10%. So 90% is your labor. So you're going to work the same. The vast majority of the value of that piece is your labor. So it's well worth it to spend a little extra and buy good material. Now that 10% was buying good material. So I would go ahead, why not? And then you have a beautiful outcome. So I'm not buying wood that I want to cover up and basically paint with a thick-bodied pigment stain that lays on the top. I would prefer to get something that's more translucent and maybe still retains the full figure and beauty of the wood. So I want to enhance it maybe a little bit, but not change it a lot. So like that curly maple table, we have some coloration on that, but we're not hiding it. We're actually making that figure pop better. So let's let me show you another way that we get coloration on some varied piece of cherry, and that is with a dye stain. This is an aniline dye. It dissolves in water, and it's a color that I've chosen because it's very close to the natural color of cherry. So when I'm trying to tone in a couple boards or a tabletop that has a little variation to it, maybe not from the same tree, they're close. If I want to get them tonally close and to look beautiful and have nothing really jump out as harshly different than another, I will wash the whole top with this aniline dye stain. And I'll maintain the translucent nature of the finish, and I'll really see the natural beauty of the wood. I use a ratio of usually a half teaspoon per 16 ounces, and I apply it twice. So you can make a more concentrated mix, but when you make it more concentrated, you don't have as much control. So I'd rather do it twice. The second time just makes it a little richer and it covers any spots I might have missed the first time. So this isn't super dark. If I wanted to get that line, I would use a little darker. Let's start out. We'll just hit the sapwood in this case with the stain. This is, I could use a darker version of it so you can hide your sapwood by going over it like this. Now, I don't worry about hiding this. This is going to be on the bottom side of the table, so I normally wouldn't even do this. Okay? Now, perfect. It looks, you can't even see it anymore. So anyway, now when I wash over the whole thing, I would let that dry, and I probably have to treat it a little more than that, but you get the idea. It's not going to be as dark. Now I'm going to go over the whole thing. Let me get this bottle over. Okay. So I'm going to get a rag. I usually apply it with a rag, not a paper towel, but. So I'm going to wash over with this dye stain. Now this dye stain, I didn't tell you the name of it. It's Early American Maple Medium Amber. It's by Wood Finishing Enterprises. I love those guys over there. They're crazy, like mad scientists with finishes. I shouldn't have stopped like that. That's one nice thing about aniline dye is it's very forgiving because it's water and it doesn't dry super fast, and you just want to keep it moving. Now look at, this is actually a dye, so it's translucent and we're seeing through it. Now you can see why I said we would want a little more concentrated and maybe go over that after. And you don't have to fuss too much with it, but you can definitely mute it and get it so it doesn't jump out at you like it did, being so harsh and white. So now, see that color? That's a lot like natural cherry, and it hasn't really altered the nature of the grain. So you're still seeing the grain pretty well, except for being so scratched. It's like 120 grit. But anyway, that's what I like to do if I want to bring the tone in together, and I would use this mix. If you want the number, if you want it from Wood Finishing Enterprises, it's number 85-0143.
We can put it in the description.
Yeah. But remember the name. It's Early American Maple Medium Amber Wood Stain. But we're going to move from this. So I would get this on there. It would dry well, lightly sand, and then I'd apply another coat of the dye stain before I put my top coat of finish. Okay? So this is what you use to bring more harmonious coloration to non-agreeable boards on cherry. All right, so I want to show you just a tip on handling and dealing with blotchiness. Now, you may hear a lot about this. I think sometimes we're too worried about it because I don't know what the percentage is, but not all cherry boards are blotchy. Some of them are just, I see them like, you can almost see through the roughs on that it's going to be blotchy. And this is one of those boards. So that's a giveaway. There's something about this area in certain boards of cherry, when you see that kind of patchiness on the dry, it's for some reason, it takes the finish more deeply, almost like end grain. I think it is a type of end grain, like swirling up to the top. So what enhances the blotch and makes it really come out is when you have a lot of absorption of the finish. So if you have like an oil finish, if you just put an oil finish right straight on here, it's going to soak in and really make that pop out. So it's the same when you use curly woods. So curly maple and whatever is also curly, and there's like an undulation in the grain. Curly wood has like this waviness to the grain. It's actually rising and lowering through the surface. The blotchiness is another kind of weird nature of the grain, although I think it's rather than the grain running like this, it's just area where it gets more absorption and it gets darker, and it just looks like a splotch on there when you get the finish done. So the problem is that in order to mitigate the blotchiness, you will also reduce the amount of pop you're going to get with the curl. So I don't know that you can separate the two, because I'll show you why in a second here. So this is an actual piece that was intended for the side of a cabinet. I think I glued this up to try to test it because I was really concerned. We're making a piece that was going to be shipped, I think, to Texas, and I was thinking, oh gosh, I do not want this sent back. That's one of the nightmares you have as a furniture maker, is like, it's one thing if something's wrong and it's in the next town, but if you have to ship it, at some expense and crate it up and all that, and then the client gets it and it's like, oh, what's this? I'm not saying that's bad. I try to always put myself in the position of a discriminating client. Like, look at it, and is there anything about it that is off-putting? I want it to be a totally warm response. Nothing really, almost all good, right? No hard edges, no blotchiness, no. So I had to make this board and figure it out because I could tell we were going to have a problem. And we had two planks that were opposite color. So I used the toning, and then I'm going to show you what happened. This is the sample board. This is the other side, and this has been treated. Now, what I did was, let's see. Okay, from this line all the way over here, I used 2 coats of the medium honeytone amber, what I just showed you, okay? Went from there over. 2 coats to bring these boards more harmoniously together. Then, from here, then next step, from this line over, I applied 1 coat with a spray gun of shellac, a 1.5 pound cut. So that just means 1.5 pounds of shellac dissolved in alcohol. So that's really key. You really want to spray that if you're going to use it. So that wash coat, what it did was it put like a very thin skin of shellac on the surface, so that then I applied the oil varnish on top. I wanted this the whole thing to be oiled. And when I applied the oil varnish, I started here and went over. So this whole area right here, between this line and here, down, has the honeytone amber, but it has no shellac. So it's just on the bare wood, it got the oil varnish. And can you see the blotches? Yeah. So you see them? It was bad. It was really kind of pronounced, right? Now the same oil was pulled over the top of the shellac, which had been previously here. So the shellac, that gave us a like a barrier coat or a sealer. What do they call that stuff? There's a certain product that's out there where you can do this to prevent absorption. So then I put the varnish on here, and it gave me that really nice color. But look it's the exact same board. You can still see kind of where the blotches would be, but they're way less pronounced. Are you seeing that? All right. So that changed the whole game with this piece. And it gave me a beautiful color of cherry, but it made an otherwise problematic board a beautiful board. And when you walk around it, you actually see it a little bit iridescent in where it would be blotchy, So let me just reiterate, this problem is not that frequent. It's really in board selection. Sometimes you just will find it. But this is a great tip to use, is that 1.5 pound cut of shellac acts as a barrier. So then when you put on your oil stain, you'll get a more even finish. So that's the beauty. That's one of the real gems and qualities of shellac, which I was going to talk about in my presentation. But look, you're getting it right here. So anyway, that's that deal. We'll talk more about that another time. But you see, if this was a curly board, you would still have the curl. But if you seal it with the shellac, you do get a little bit of a muting of it. All right, let's get to the straight-on finish. Here we've got our serving tray. It's all done. It's nicely sanded. The corners are softened. I am going to post this video. I made an entire video. I'm going to show you a lot of the steps we skipped about finishing this and smoothing it off and what I did to make the corners flush and actually gluing it up so that when you glue it up, you get like a healing and those dovetails really start to look sweet. All right? So let me just show you what we're going to use here. Now, we could use Danish oil. It's a fine finish for this. Danish oil is a kind of a thin-bodied wiping varnish. So you need multiple coats before you get any kind of build. But what's nice about it is it retains, after you put it on there, you can tell it's finished. It looks protected and finished, but you still have that close to the wood feeling, you know, like the Danish modern furniture. You feel like you can still kind of feel the wood, and you know it's finished. So that's what you get with this thinner bodied Danish oil finish. Now it's great, it works so easy, you wipe it on, you wipe it off, but it's not as protective against water. So it will water ring out on you fairly, not without too much trouble, I mean, pretty easily. So I prefer to use a wiping oil varnish that has more protection against water. And that would be, I mean, the one that most people grab first, polyurethane. And polyurethane is a type of resin that is super hard. So it tends to look really shiny and plasticky. And that's what I'm trying to avoid. I'm trying to get a finish that gives me something of the close to the wood feeling of Danish oil with the protection of something greater, like tung oil. Tung oil varnish is so nice. I mean, it's really a high quality varnish that is super easy to apply, just like the Danish oil, but it has much greater water repelling properties. So it's perfect for a tray like this. That's obviously going to get some spills. It's going to get some water rings or whatever if you don't put a protective enough finish on here. So we want a good finish. We want a good looking finish. So you don't need the straight on polyurethane. I should say there are some finishes like this General Finishes Armor Seal, which is a blend. It's got a urethane in it, but it's not all urethane. And it's thinner. And this is one of the nicer looking urethane finishes I like. So you can, the General Finishes Armor Seal. The Waterlock, so this is a tung oil based, polymerized tung oil, whatever. That just means it's been heated, it will dry nicely. So if you can't just use raw tung oil. Don't think of raw tung oil as being more pure than this. It's really not. It takes forever to dry. Polymerized has just been heat treated, changes the properties a little bit, so it dries beautifully. And it rubs out nicely. So let's just throw this on and take a look at what happens. I'll show you how easy it is to use. The first coat is more of a kind of let it soak in coat. So I usually use, you can use just paper towels for this. And I'm going to pour a little on there. You could put it in a jar and dip it and wipe it civilized like, or you could just pour a little on there. Get it on your rag. And look at that color already. I mean, that's how it will look after it's kind of built up, but I'm going to move it around. It's got a little amber quality to it, you can see. Plus it's getting into my rag here. And I really want to get it soaked into this bottom because that's going to take the most abuse and get it right in. Just really let it soak in there. Now the first coat will soak in quite a bit. Now the thing is, you can thin this out and it'll work really well. Now I'm using the original Waterlocks, which they call a medium sheen. So when it goes on and it dries, after you get a buildup of it, they say it's a 75 on the sheen scale. All right, check this out. And then after 6 months or so, it goes down to a 50. So medium sheen, whatever that is. So then the dovetails really start to pop. We're seeing those pins come out in the tails here, and you can see the marking gauge line. It's fairly thick. That's unusual, that thick. And then on that, this is the end where we're seeing the ends of the tails of the wider end grain. So the end grain just absorbs so much more finish, it pops and really creates a contrast. It looks so much darker because it's absorbing in to the end grain. And that gives us that signature look we're after with the dovetails. So I want to just really make sure I get this soaked in all around. And that's that satisfying first coat. We've got to get the bottom. Try to get some out of this rag. Get some more off of here. So I'm just going to do this. I'm going to make sure I get maximum absorption and then let it sit. And if it's a dry climate, you know, this, I think it says close to 24 hours, but it's dry in 12. If you're, you know, if you're in the middle of winter and you got the dry heat on or whatever, definitely it dries really nicely, especially if you don't put it on thick. Now you can thin this out, like I said, with mineral spirits or paint thinner. You can. I've done it as an experiment. I did 50-50 mineral spirits and this coming right out of the can, and it's almost like you're wiping on a little heavier than water, and you're wiping it on, and then it just flashes off. It's very thin. So you feel like you're almost polishing it. So you're leaving very little material. It looks almost like you're doing this, right? But when it's dry, you don't see any brush marks or anything. It's really sweet and easy to do. That was the method that George Nakashima used for a long time. You know of him. Then I heard they went over to a different finish, but they used to use Waterlocks or J.E. Moser's, whatever. Now, Sutherland Wells is another place to get good tung oil. It's pricey, so you're going to buy it in a quart can, and the way to make the most of it is you don't want it to go bad on you in the can, so you got to preserve it well. I'll usually pour it into smaller jars, like these little 4-ounce canning jars, and leave very little oxygen on top because these will dry in the jar and you'll lose it. But the less oxygen you leave in there, the longer it'll stay. And then there's a few tricks. You can use this stuff called blotchiness, which is pretty good. Or I started using these little stickers where you poke a little hole, like you tighten up your jar, like you fill it up close, then you can, whoops, that's a little bigger hole than I wanted. I just wanted to make a little tiny hole, but that must be soft, or I must be superhuman tonight. And then you take these little Band-Aids. This is another method. I'll tell you what it is in a second. I got this from my son for Christmas a ago when I just started using it. So you want to go right over the hole like a Band-Aid. And then you take the suction gadget here, pump and seal, and it's just going to suck. Oh, jeez. Okay, so it's actually, oh, this is too full. Now, I'll release it there. Now, did you notice the top of the lid is now, you can see the dimple where the hole is? So I created a vacuum. It just works around that. It's like a rubberized Band-Aid. So when you suck the air out, it pulls the air out, but then it pulls that rubber thing back on the hole. So it seals for a vacuum. So this is one way to make a little better vacuum. Or there's blotchiness, which you spray in the can, and it lays a layer of argon gas, prevents the air from oxidizing and curing it in the can. Look, oh, another method is when you've filled up your bottle, if it's way down here, that's a problem because you have too much oxygen over the top of it. I've had it go bad. So I dropped a bunch of marbles in this one. It brought the level right up to the top, and I still have good finish in there. If you leave a lot of oxygen over the top, even with this suction thing, it dries in there and it hardens and you lose it. For as much as this costs, it's worth getting some canning jars and put it in some little jars because it goes a long way. And if you don't leave much oxygen, it'll last you a long time. And if you do lose one, you're only losing a couple ounces, not the whole can. That's why I squeeze this can to get most of the oxygen out. I'm squeezing it until I see the level come right up to the top, or right up near the top, and then I'll screw the cover on and keeps it a good while. So, all right, so that was one coat. Look at that. It's already starting to look beautiful. And it has a Danish oil look already. But the tung oil has a heavier body to it, like more resin in there, so it builds up faster. Of course, if you thin it out, it takes longer. So here's a little experiment I did on walnut. I cut the tung oil varnish in half, 50%. And I started here and did a coat. Then I did a second, third, fourth, fifth. So this is 5 coats of original Waterlux. And it's really nice. I mean, it's really thin. I hadn't tried sanding it with steel wool, but let's do that really quick here. Piece of steel wool. Here's burnish it. And then I don't think I have any wax with me. But this just knocks it back a little bit. Oh, it's really, let's see if I can. And then you'd want to polish it. Just put a furniture polish. If I just buff it here. The steel wool burnishes the surface and gives you this really softer sheen and a really fine look. With polish, it would look better. But you can do that at the end of your project. But this stuff's so nice, you almost can just buff it down with the steel wool at the end and burnish it with a cloth, and you're good. Now that's one of them. This tray over here, I've got 3 coats on. Doesn't look that different, does it? But when this dries, it'll dry out. But that's almost like Danish oil, but 3 thin coats. I'm going to put probably another 1 or 2 on, and I'll have a really good protection on this cherry base. This is the one that was too long, remember? If you saw that, that one. This was the size I first made. That's probably your standard, and this is your luxury, larger, for that big breakfast in bed meal. The big secret to great finishing is start with great materials. So that's why really wood selection is huge in picking out the wood to match. And if you can do the whole piece out of one piece of wood, like these trays, if you remember, I resawed the sides. So those are all from the same. And I've got beautiful quarter sawn figure. And then the bottom is veneered out of a nice, almost quartered, very linear grained material. So we've got a nice harmonious look there. But with solid wood, you don't have that luxury all the time, and you just got to do your best to pick it out wisely. So, well, that's it for tonight. Thank you so much for being a part of this. See you next time.